So yeah, first of all, I would like to apologize that I cannot be present in Venice in person. At the same time, I would like to really thank the organizers for providing me with the opportunity to join in online. In my presentation, I would like to present you the main findings of our assessment on the state of play on CCS in Europe in 2021. And if I say our, I mean the CO2 GeoNet drafting team, who you see here on the right, and the entire CO2 GeoNet report group with contributors from 32 different European countries. In 2013, a first assessment of the state of play was published under the Pan-European Coordination Action on CO2 Geological Storage, or in short, the FP-CGS Europe, FP7 CGS Europe project. Since then, the CCS landscape in Europe has changed. We have seen an increase in ambitions for climate protection on the international and European level. These ambitions triggered policy developments at international, EU, and national levels. For example, national CO2 emission reduction strategies are currently under discussion in many countries. At the same time, CCS projects are developing, including the EU-supported projects of common interest. Also, we see the emergence of companies and sites offering a CO2 transport and storage service, for example, by the Norwegian Lights project. Buettner and al. Recently reviewed the role of CCS and CCU in Europe in scenarios to reach the 1.5 degrees C target. They calculated a needed median rate of CO2 capture of around 350 megatons per year for 2030 that needs to increase to around a gigaton per year by 2050. In reality, according to the Global CCS Institute, in 2021, around 37 megatons per year were captured and injected in the ground worldwide. So these recent developments and the still existing large gap between what we presently capture and inject and what we need to store motivated the CO2 GeoNet Association to prepare an update on the state of play on CO2 geological storage in Europe. Our assessment was based on a questionnaire survey. In the questionnaire, contributors from each country were asked to provide information on various topics around the geological storage of CO2. On some aspects, we also ask for information on CO2 capture and transport and on related technologies. In total, we received contributions from 32 countries, which are marked here on the map in green and blue. All the findings were summarized in a report that is available on the CO2 GeoNet website. The filled-in questionnaires with country-specific information are provided as an annex to the report. From our assessment, the overall key message is twofold. Firstly, yes, CCS is moving forward in Europe. There has been a clear progress in bringing CCS back onto national agendas for climate protection and in moving from CCS or CO2 storage research to implementation. Secondly, our assessment revealed a wide spread of activity and knowledge levels, indicating that there is a continued need for pan-European cooperation on all aspects of CCS to rapidly deploy CCS at scale. I will try to underpin this key message with some examples in the following. In recent years, new national climate protection policies and strategies have been developed to address the 2030 and 2050 climate targets. For example, all EU member states had to prepare and submit a National Energy and Climate Plan, or NECP in short, for their 2030 climate objectives. In these, a broad variety of pathways is evident. CCS is actually mentioned in most member states' NECP. Those are the countries marked here in dark and medium blue. However, foreseen activities relating to CCS differ significantly from country to country. They range from only considering CCS in future energy scenarios, support for research activities, national capacity assessment and feasibility studies, to an implementation of specific large-scale projects. Some countries consider parts or only parts of the CCS chain in their strategies, and some countries favor CCU over CCS. Regarding legislation and regulations, so all member states now transposed the EU CCS directive. Also, UK, Norway, and Iceland did so. As a result, as of June 2021, CO2 storage was permitted in 19 out of the 32 assessed countries and prohibited in 9 of the assessed countries. In 4 countries, there's no national legislation dedicated to CO2 storage available, so that CO2 storage is neither permitted nor prohibited there. In some countries, classification was not so easy. For example, in some countries in which CO2 storage is in principle permitted, there are regional exclusions or specific limitations that in some cases actually impose severe restrictions on the permissibility of CO2 storage or on the area that can be considered for CO2 storage. In Germany, CO2 storage is not directly prohibited, but it is not possible at present due to legal constraints. In comparison to the situation in 2012, when we did our last assessment, there are some changes, but no clear trend. Preferred storage options in most countries are saline aquifers and depleted or depleting hydrocarbon fields. Iceland is advancing in situ mineral storage, which is at present only considered in Portugal and Greece as well. From the information we received, it was evident that assessment levels differ significantly from country to country. Levels reach from availability of national atlases to basic assessments. Countries with high assessment levels are indicated here in green or light green, while countries in light yellow or orange have more basic assessment levels. Estonia and Finland reported zero storage capacity based on their unfavorable geology. The most recent Europe-wide compilation of storage capacity data was done in the CO2 Stop project. However, CO2 Stop used mostly already existing data. In our survey, 25 countries reported recent updates of their national storage capacity assessments. Thus, we see various reasons to prepare a consolidated and up-to-date European CO2 storage atlas. So how much CO2 can we store in Europe? The last Europe-wide assessment from CO2 Stop and the EU geocapacity projects indicate that we have a fairly large storage capacity in Europe. If we take the EU industrial emissions from 2019 and the conservative estimate for the total storage capacity from the EU geocapacity project, we can calculate that if, for example, 1/10 of that capacity could be used, 2 decades worth of industrial emissions from Europe could be stored. So even these old numbers clearly indicate that Europe has sufficient storage capacity to deploy CCS at scale. Reported updates range from thorough storage capacity assessments or reassessments on country or even transnational level to more detailed assessments focusing on selected regions or clusters of potential storage sites. To highlight a few recent achievements on the very advanced end, you see here the cover pages of the Norwegian Storage Atlas and of the Nordic CCS and the UK databases. For mineral storage, Carbfix published an online worldwide mineral storage atlas a few years ago. Regarding projects, we find a large spread of foci, scales, and stages of CCS-related projects in Europe. In several European countries, full chain or cluster projects are planned in FEED stage or about to start. Those are the countries marked here in green. However, CO2 is still only injected for geological storage in the ground in Norway in the 2 well-known large-scale storage projects, Sleipner and Snøhvit. On a smaller scale, there are the 2 operating Carbfix storage pilots in Iceland. The other European storage pilot project finished operation as planned. The Hontomin pilot project has been on hold since 2018. Commercial CO2 EOR operations are ongoing in Hungary, Turkey, and Croatia, marked here in orange. Also, for CO2 capture and transport, there are several test and pilot facilities available in Europe, for example, in the countries marked here in gray. In the last years, various pilots have been developed for CO2 capture from different industrial plants, whereas before the focus was on capturing from fossil-fired power plants. There were several projects of common interest for cross-border CO2 transport networks from the North Sea area on the PCI list when the report was written. This PCI list was updated in November 2021, and it now includes some new PCI, whereas others dropped out. These PCI may form nuclei, in particular for advancing full-chain CCS projects that include cluster and/or storage hub concepts. Since 2020, also the EU Innovation Fund provides funding for large and small-scale projects that aim to demonstrate innovative low-carbon technologies. Nearly all assessed countries reported doing research activities related to CO2 storage. Also, they reported an involvement in EU-funded or regional research projects. This shows that research continues to be very active, with research cooperation being an integral part of it. Research hotspots are countries colored here in red and light red. As a very simple proxy for the research activity level in a country, we used the reported number of active research institutions in that country. So please look more at the overall tendencies rather than at the individual numbers. National funding for CCS-related research is widely spread in Europe, as you can see here from the large number of countries colored in green. However, total available budgets are very different, ranging from PhD support in some countries to test site development in others. Thematically, CO2 storage-related research focuses on storage capacity assessments in many countries. In some countries, research has been heavily focused on CO2 capture and/or utilization instead of storage in recent years. Apart from national funding, there are various other funding sources for CCS or CO2 storage-related research on a regional, European, or even international level. Some examples from the European and regional level are listed here. This list does not include the classical FP7, Horizon 2020, or Horizon Europe research projects. The ERA-Net GeoERA did not address CO2 storage directly, but worked on various fundamental topics and that are highly relevant for the geological storage of CO2, so that we decided to include it in our list. Despite of all these different activities and developments, the overall awareness of CCS within the general public was still reported to be low to very low in most countries. It was reported to be somewhat higher among political and industrial stakeholders. Please note that these statements are in most cases based solely on the reported perceptions of the individual contributors, and they are not based on any social scientific survey. So all these statements should be treated with some care. In many countries, attention by the media increased during the recent negotiations on the national climate protection strategies. In the general public, CCS is still often perceived as a risky technology. The perception was reported to be more positive in some countries for capture on CO2 sources other than fossil fuel power plants. In particular, CCS concepts allowing for negative emissions led to a higher acceptance also of CO2 storage. And offshore storage has in many countries a higher acceptance than onshore storage. Striking exceptions are Norway and Iceland, for which high awareness level and neutral to positive attitudes towards CCS were reported. Reported reasons for this include the investment of the Norwegian government in high-profile projects such as the Technology Center Mongstad and the Norwegian Longship project. In Iceland, it helped acceptance, among other things, that the CO2 stored in basalt is in principle based on processes that also occur in nature. And in addition, the so-called CAPFIX technology has been developed on a geothermal plant that is in the renewable energy sector. So it is perceived as supporting energy transition rather than hindering it. This has been one of the arguments against CCS on fossil-fired power plants in many countries for many years. So I hope I could underpin with the examples given that overall CCS is moving forward in Europe. But still, as I said, Sleipner and Snøhvit are the only really ongoing operating large-scale CO2 storage projects in Europe, though there are still a lot of things to do for large-scale implementation of CCS. As capacity assessments are still heterogeneous across Europe and recent updates of national storage capacity assessments were reported for many countries, there's a need to prepare an up-to-date and consolidated European CO2 storage atlas. This will support governments' decisions on CCS. For some countries, this presumably requires further assessment work, potentially including the acquisition of new data. Due to the limited number of storage projects in operation or in advanced implementation stages in Europe, there is still limited experience with the licensing of CO2 storage sites, both on the operator side and at the regulatory bodies. So some knowledge and experience sharing among these could be useful to speed up implementation of future CCS projects. Striking in our assessment was that a large diversification of CCU and CCS concepts has taken place in the last years, in which a variety of different CO2 sources and sinks are now considered. Some of these concepts appear to be more acceptable to the public than CCS on fossil-fired power plants. So communicating the various options around the CCS technology and their specific benefits may help to increase the acceptance of CCU and CCS technologies in general, so that hopefully various projects can be rapidly implemented. Thank you very much for your attention, and my apologies for being a bit too long.